What I like to tell speculators is the easy money has been made. The increase in the uranium price from $20 to $100 took care of that. And the prices of a basket of decent uranium juniors is uniformly up 300%, moving from out of favor to in favor. But the sure money is ahead of us. The sure money occurs because we've never had a circumstance before where a junior like NextGen, as an example, could, I'm not saying that they will, could engage in long-term contracts with credit-worthy counterparties to the extent that a junior could raise the $6 to $8 billion necessary to build that deposit. The fact that the junior could do it means that if Rio Tinto or BHP or Cameco wants to come in and buy that junior, they're going to have to buy it at a price that takes into account that the junior doesn't need to sell. And that's a game changer.
Well, let's shift to fossil fuels, hydrocarbons, whatever you want to call them, but a startling development, not a big surprise in a place like Canada at this point in time, but a member of the New Democratic Party there, Charlie Angus, he recently proposed to Parliament a bill known as the Fossil Fuels Advertising Act. During presenting this bill, he noticed that the oil and gas sector is killing people, and so we need to ban positive speech on the industry. And I quote, "It is prohibited for a person to promote a fossil fuel-related brand element, or the production of a fossil fuel. Violate this as a regular citizen, and the act prescribes summary conviction and a fine of up to $500,000. It's just absurd. Violate it as an oil company, and the punishment could be as strict as 2 years in jail or a fine of $1 million. Now, Doomberg, who shed light on this in his newsletter, thinks it will never get passed into law, but is nonetheless helping to normalize this kind of radical ideology around energy, as well as curtail of speech by governments. I'm wondering what your take on this proposed bill is, and do you think this makes Canada more of a dangerous jurisdiction to invest in as an oil and gas investor? Does this mean it's very important to be diversified outside of that country with your investments?
3 responses. The first is, if the gentleman is concerned about the fact that oil companies are killing people, he needs to think about war. Oil companies don't start war, governments do. And I would propose to him that if he was interested in a narrative that promoted life, that he should say that any mention of government, which starts war, or any mention of tax, which funds war, should be a felony or an indictable offense. And anybody who speaks positively about government should be subjected to 2 years imprisonment or a fine of $250,000 or both. If he's concerned about life, he should be concerned about war. And if he's concerned about war, he should be concerned about government. And his policy of prosecution and persecution should go to the cause of his concern. The big thinkers in Canada and the United States and in the West, that special brand of moron, the Trudeau, the Biden, the Merkel, they're the ideological successors to the Club of Rome, who were proven so spectacularly wrong in the decade of the 70s. Knowing that they can't convince their constituencies that it's okay for them to fly 1,200 private planes to Davos to tell you and I to drive less, they've decided that since we won't act in our own interest as they see it, they have to force us to do it. If they can't convince, they have to compel. And I think we have a duty at the very least to display to them what I would call the international high sign of unfriendliness, which is to say an extended middle finger. I remember very well in my youth a counterculture publication called the Whole Earth Catalog. And they had a play on Marx on the cover. Marx famously said, "Workers of the world, unite." The Whole Earth Catalog had a slogan that said, "Workers of the world, disperse." And it said under that, what if they gave a war and no one came? What if they charged a tax and no one paid? What if they imposed a regulation and no one obeyed? The correct response to that member is to say to him that government is the enemy, not the solution, and that he is a mouthpiece for tyranny.
Now, on the issue of potential risk to investments in Canada in the oil and gas sector, do you think that's maybe blowing things out of proportion, and that it's still a very investable country when it comes to the oil and gas space?
I think it's an investable country because their geological endowment and their human endowment is so great. The Canadian government has achieved a very difficult task, which is to say they've been even dumber than the U.S. government. Both countries are engaged in a race to the bottom, and the Canadians are ahead. My suspicion is that what I call the consolidated left in Canada, the Liberals, the NDP, the Greens, and the Bloc Québécois, regularly command 60% of the vote in Canada. The Canadian citizenry seems, until they can't afford it anymore, to have a tolerance for stupidity. If you remember the reign of the prior Trudeau, in 14 or 15 years, he succeeded in almost bankrupting one of the wealthiest countries in the world. His successor, Jean Chrétien, who had the same political orientation as his mentor, Pierre Trudeau, was forced, because he had no second choice, to do the right thing. And Chrétien, of course, was succeeded by Harper, while Harper, much like Reagan in our country, didn't actually reduce government spending. What he did was reduce the increase in government spending, which is to say that the societies are so vibrant that you don't actually have to be smart. You just have to be somewhat less stupid. And my hope is, in the next election, that the Canadian voter, I'm not asking them to be smart. I'm not asking them to vote libertarian. I'm just asking them, particularly the Bloc Québécois, to be less stupid.
Very well said. And we'll see how that works out. I left that country because of this sort of level of stupidity that you speak of. Now, I want to switch to the nuclear sector, because we were just discussing how inept governments are and how corrupting their influence can be. Wherever they stick their noses in, things seem to go in the wrong direction. And, nuclear energy at the moment seems to be gaining more support than ever amongst the big thinkers, as you've pointed out, the Macrons, the Trudeaus, the Bidens. My issue with this is people this incompetent, and some would argue, including myself, downright evil human beings, getting so heavily involved supporting and backing nuclear energy. Is there any risk to the sector here, or is their seal of approval a bullish sign for the industry moving forward?
I think it's both. I mean, the idea that for the second time in my life, actually, when I was an early investor in solar and geothermal, I actually found myself embarrassingly being politically correct in some circles. I actually felt more ideologically honest when Biden thought my support for nuclear power was borderline felonious than when, in the oddly named Inflation Reduction Act, he decided to subsidize us to the extent of $5.2 billion. I actually felt better being vilified by him than being subsidized by him. That notwithstanding, I guess because I pay so much tax, I have to be willing to tolerate some idiotic subsidy in my behalf. I'm not comfortable with it. And I think there is a real fear that because of government largesse, the industry will be co-opted, which is to say, in our search for ill-gotten goods, which is to say subsidy, that we do things because they're politically correct rather than because they are economically sound. Whether that transpires or not, or whether that's just the rantings of a crazed old libertarian, I don't know. But I am concerned about the fact that their subsidy may co-opt us and cause us to do things that aren't in the best interest of our customers or our investors.
So let's touch on uranium supply demand fundamentals here. Things are getting more interesting. We've got Kazatomprom, Cameco, and Orano all expressing an inability to hit desired production targets in one form or another. Kazatomprom, the world's largest producer by far, may actually have to buy on the spot market to fulfill contracts. With all this in mind, does your current valuation of uranium equities change at all? Because I know we've had quite a run up, especially for those who had the foresight to be in the sector earlier. A lot of profits have already been made. Do the valuations change in your mind given this curtail on potential future production from these big players?
If you use the phrase valuations, the answer is yes. If you use the phrase capitalizations, maybe not. I want to draw the distinction between the short-term price that you see in the market and the long-term valuations in the companies. The cure for high prices is always, Jesse, high prices. And whether it takes a couple years, 2 or 3 years to balance that out is a very different question. It takes a long time to impact supply, as Kazatomprom is finding out. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. No, I'm not. I'm going to pursue it. Then I'll go to what I was going to talk about. We need to remember that a near-term increase in price doesn't increase supply because it takes a long time to permit, finance, and build new capacity. And each of Cameco and Kazatomprom, not so far Orano, has said that they won't restart the hot-stopped care and maintenance production until they have enough term contracts to ensure their shareholders a reasonable return on capital employed. What that means is that the spot market, while it drives investor perception, is less important in company valuations than the term market. And the term market is very opaque. People rely on the spot market because they don't have to do any work. They just look and feel. Understanding the term market requires you to work and think. So while the term market is all about where real valuation is created, market capitalization is created in the spot market. Now, what I hope your listeners will think through is the fact that the structure of the uranium market is changing right in front of our eyes. The spot market is becoming less important in commodity transactions, in some measure because my former employer reduced the float by 50 million pounds, and the spot market is no longer a reliable source of material for the reactor community. Two, financing reactors has changed. We're building dozens of them, and there's over 100 in the planning stages. This is a capital-intensive business, between $5 and $10 billion a crack. And the lenders increasingly are requiring the utilities who build these plants to lock in the term market sufficient supply that they can amortize the debt. What this means is that the term market is going to become more important, not less important. And the implications of that are really profound. What it means is that uranium will be the only mineral commodity that I know of where investors and companies will be able, with some certainty, to understand the selling price of the commodity and hence, to some degree, the margins, the operating margins that they're going to enjoy. The gold trade, that which hasn't been streamed, takes place in the spot market. So there's no price certainty. The same with oil, the same with iron, the same with coal. The longest reference that you have in the iron business is a year. With uranium, you're going to start having references with minimum selling points and stipulated selling bands, contractually agreed, for as much as 15 years. And if the counterparty to that term contract is an investment grade credit, Ontario Power, Tokyo Electric Power, China General Nuclear, Duke Power, Southern companies, the companies will be able to use those contracts to lower their cost of capital at the bank to build the projects. And lazy security analysts like myself will be able to look at the stipulated prices going out 10 years and 15 years and do a much better job of forecasting revenues, margins, and free cash flow, which should lower the cost of capital to the uranium business for a very long time. What I like to tell speculators is the easy money has been made. The increase in the uranium price from $20 to $100 took care of that. And the prices of a basket of decent uranium juniors is uniformly up 300%, moving from out of favor to in favor. But the sure money is ahead of us. The sure money occurs because we've never had a circumstance before where a junior like NextGen, as an example, could, I'm not saying that they will, could engage in long-term contracts with credit-worthy counterparties to the extent that a junior could raise the $6 to $8 billion necessary to build that deposit. The fact that the junior could do it means that if Rio Tinto or BHP or Cameco wants to come in and buy that junior, they're going to have to buy it at a price that takes into account that the junior doesn't need to sell. And that's a game changer.